Hey, welcome back to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans, for Ohio State fans. From the West Coast, I'm your host, Zach Moore. Today is Sunday, September 22nd, 2024, and thank you for joining me while I talk to myself into a microphone about Ohio State's 49-14 victory over Marshall in the Horseshoe yesterday afternoon. Let's start with the Ohio State offense. It was thrilling. It was explosive in this game. The Buckeyes had 4 scoring plays of 40 yards or more. The big plays came through the air. They came on the ground, and just about everyone got into the act. Emeka Egbuka opened the scoring on Ohio State's second play from scrimmage with a 68-yard catch and run on a nifty tunnel screen that led to Ohio State's first touchdown. Several drives later, Quinshon Judkins scored on an 86-yard run that was perfectly blocked by the Ohio State offensive line. Then freshman phenom Jeremiah Smith scored in the second half on a beautiful 53-yard catch and run that was a really nice sight adjustment by Will Howard. Howard read the blitz and fired a perfect throw into pressure right at Smith's face mask, and then Smith did the rest. He was off to the races. Finally, TreVeyon Henderson scored on a 40-yard touchdown run to open the third quarter. So a lot of explosive plays, highly entertaining to watch the Ohio State offensive attack. It was as balanced as it was explosive as well. 289 yards through the air, 281 on the ground. The Ohio State ground game was unstoppable yesterday. Quinshon Judkins and Trey Henderson both averaged over 12 yards a carry. Judkins led the ground game with 173 yards on only 14 carries. Henderson had 76 yards on 6 carries, and for the second game in a row, they combined for 4 rushing touchdowns. I mean, as a pair, Judkins and Henderson have lived up to the hype. They have been a devastating 1-2 punch that I don't believe we have ever seen at Ohio State. Maybe you have Archie Griffin and Pete Johnson, and if you're a Ohio State fan of a certain vintage, you remember those two back in the mid-'70s. But not since then have we seen a devastating 1-2 punch in the run game like what we're seeing right now in Judkins and Henderson. Now, the Ohio State passing game was just about as impressive yesterday. Will Howard was very efficient, 16 of 20 for 275 yards, 2 touchdowns, and also his first interception of the season, which, quite frankly, did not bother me at all. I mean, Howard was trying to hit Smith, who was singled up on a smaller Marshall defensive back, Josh Moten. Give Moten credit. He had excellent coverage and just made a nice play on the football. Smith almost managed to snatch the ball away from him on the play, but look, I like the play call. Jeremiah Smith in one-on-one coverage is almost always going to be a huge advantage for the Ohio State offense. And look, sometimes the opponent just makes a good play, as Moten did there, as John Cooper liked to say. Those kids are on scholarship too, so credit Moten on the play. I did not have a problem with that interception from Howard. I also love what I saw from the Ohio State receivers. Emeka Egbuka, Jeremiah Smith, and Carnell Tate combined for 251 yards on 12 receptions and 2 touchdowns. If there is a better trio in all of college football, I'd like to know who it is. I mean, you can make an argument for other individual receivers being better than maybe Egbuka, Smith, or Tate, but as a trio, I would bet my 401k on this group being the best in all of college football right now. I mean, the Buckeyes start Big Ten play next Saturday, so much stiffer tests are on the horizon, but I'm pretty confident Egbuka, Smith, and Tate will continue to deliver big numbers in Big Ten play as well. So love what I'm seeing out of that trio. I think it's the best in the country right now. Now, after a 2-game absence, left guard Donovan Jackson made his season debut, and it was no coincidence that the offensive line had its best game of the young season, at least in my opinion they did. In 45 snaps, Jackson was the highest graded offensive lineman of the starters according to PFF, with an overall grade of 86.6. He had a run blocking grade of 88.1 and a pass blocking grade of 82.4. And with Jackson finally next to him in the starting lineup, I don't think it was any coincidence that left tackle Josh Simmons had his best all-around game of the season. According to PFF, Simmons finished with an overall grade of 75.4, which was his highest of the season so far. Simmons also finished with a solid run blocking grade of 70.2, and he was excellent in pass protection again with a grade of 84. Now, according to PFF, Simmons has not given up a single pressure yet this season, and of course, he's not yet allowed a sack. With a healthy Donovan Jackson and Seth McLaughlin at center, I think the left side of the offensive line is really good. And I'm not grading on a curve there. I mean, I think they are legitimately good on that side of the line. Now, Josh Fryer was the only starter yesterday who wasn't great. He was beat for the game's only sack of Will Howard. That was by Mike Green. But on the telecast, Joel Klatt was talking up Green as a future NFL player. And we identified Green in our preview pod as a player to watch. So, no disgrace, I don't think, losing to Green on that play by Fryer. Now, if we go off the PFF grades, which I think, of course, you have to take with a grain of salt, it's the right side of the offensive line that's still a bit of a work in progress, but the grades aren't terrible there either. I mean, they're not alarming as maybe they were at times last season. And despite the rough day pass blocking yesterday, Josh Fryer is still grading out in the mid to high 60s across the board. His overall grade is 67.5. Now that's down a bit from his overall grade in 2023, but I don't think at this stage that's a huge cause for concern. Integra Cibola, he's grading out in the low 60s across the board. His overall grade is 62.4, so definitely some room for improvement there for Cibola, but not bad as a first-year starter, I don't think. And then I think you have to consider kind of the overall output of the Ohio State offense through 3 games. And look, I understand Akron, Western Michigan, and Marshall aren't exactly a murderer's row, but the Buckeye offense is 3rd nationally in offensive yards per play, averaging 8.58 yards per play. They're 5th in total offense, averaging 552 yards per game, and they're tied for 3rd nationally in scoring offense, averaging 52 points per game. I mean, even adjusting for the competition, those numbers would not be possible if the big guys up front weren't playing well. So I really, really like what I'm seeing from the offensive line now. And I thought they looked even better yesterday with Donovan Jackson back in the lineup. Now, the Ohio State defense, on the other hand, it was a little bit of a mixed bag yesterday. I thought they left a little something to be desired, certainly in the first half. I'm going to quote Bill Landis from his post-game column today to get us started here. Landis wrote, quote, "Here's the thing. Marshall did not continuously move the ball on Ohio State's defense. The Thundering Herd did, however, have 2 sustained drives worth analyzing, a 13-play, 75-yard drive to open the game and a 9-play, 65-yard touchdown drive to end the first half. On its other 44 plays, Marshall averaged 2.2 yards per play," end quote. Now, it is worth noting before we dive in here that star defensive tackle Tyleik Williams did not play yesterday. Williams was not in uniform. We don't know the nature of his injury right now. Ryan Day said in the postgame that Williams is day to day. And I thought it was up front on the 2 Marshall scoring drives where it looked like Ohio State was deficient, right? And you could notice Tyleik Williams' absence. The Buckeyes were getting beat at the point of attack just a little bit, I thought, on those 2 scoring drives. It was also very hot yesterday. I believe the temperature at kickoff was close to 90. And according to Jenny Taft on the telecast, the temperature actually on the field was closer to 140 degrees if you're factoring in the turf, the temperature of the turf. Larry Johnson rotated early and often in this game along his defensive line to keep his guys fresh. 11 different defensive linemen got snaps yesterday, and 3 of them played extensively at the 3 technique in place of Williams. Hero Kanu started the game at that spot. He played 32 snaps. Tywan Malone and Caden McDonald also got a fair number of snaps at that spot. Malone played 28 snaps. McDonald played 22. And I'm not sure we can say any of them really flashed yesterday. Malone was probably the one that did a little bit. He was credited with a tackle for loss on Stone Earl that ended a Marshall drive on downs. But also Earl slipped on the play to help Malone out. Maybe Malone makes that play anyway. There were a couple other Buckeye tacklers in the area, but I can't say that any of those players played really well yesterday in Williams' stead. And it was surprising for me to see Stone Earl throw as well as he did against the Buckeye defense in this game. Earl came into this game completing only 44% of his passes, and in about 2.5 quarters of action, he finished 16 of 21 for 132 yards passing and 1 touchdown pass. And while he didn't gash the Ohio State defense as a runner, he was a factor in the run game. He had a few timely runs to keep the chains moving for the Herd, especially on those 2 scoring drives. Now, Earl had to leave the game in the third quarter with what looked like an ankle injury and did not return, but he played much better than I thought he would. Give him some credit. Maybe you give the Marshall coaching staff a little bit of credit. They did have an extra week prepared for this game, but also I think we can point to maybe an unmotivated Ohio State defense that really wasn't playing up to its standard as well here. That was a factor. Now, the opening touchdown drive didn't really bother me nearly as much as Marshall's scoring drive at the end of the first half. I mean, it's not unusual for an overmatched opponent coming out of a bye week to script up a successful scoring drive to start a game. No big deal there, in my view. But the last 3 minutes of the second quarter were very frustrating for me. I mean, after Trey Henderson's touchdown put the Buckeyes up 28-7, on the ensuing kickoff, Jaden Fielding kicked the ball out of bounds for the third straight time. A third straight kickoff, he kicked out of bounds. It was a really rough day for Fielding. That gave Marshall the ball at their own 35-yard line. Later in that drive, after a 10-yard completion from Stone Earl to Elijah Metcalf to the Ohio State 27-yard line, Caden Curry would be flagged for a roughing the passer and then thrown out of the game upon review for targeting. It was just a boneheaded play by Curry that set Marshall up at the Ohio State 13-yard line. Stone would then hit Metcalf again on the ensuing play for the touchdown. It looked like there might have been a bit of a coverage bust by the Ohio State secondary on that play. It was pure slop by the Ohio State defense, and it gave Marshall a little bit of momentum heading into the half. And what was frustrating for me is that I actually thought that when that drive started, Marshall looked content to just run clock and get to the half. And they took possession with 3:33 to go. They were not in a hurry-up pace. They ran 3 conservative plays for 9 yards that took the game clock all the way down to the 2-minute timeout. But then coming out of the 2-minute timeout, Denzel Burke gets beat for a 10-yard completion. Then A.J. Turner gets loose for an 8-yard run up the middle. Then Davison Igbinosun gets beat for another 10-yard completion. And it was on that play that Curry committed the personal foul. I just thought the defensive line allowed Stone Earl entirely too much time to operate comfortably without really putting any pressure on him. Clearly, in my view, the defense mailed it in on that drive. And, okay, look, was that the first time we've seen something like that from a Buckeye defense in a blowout win over an overmatched opponent in September? No, not at all. In the moment, it was frustrating, but, I also think it's important not to overreact to something like this against an opponent like Marshall with field temperatures in the 140s, and also the Buckeyes being able to do whatever they wanted offensively in this game. I mean, the defense did actually spend a lot of extra time on the field because the offense was scoring too quickly. The Buckeyes had 2 very short scoring drives, a 2-play drive and then a 1-play scoring drive in the first half that put the defense right back out on the field. So I think you have to factor that in a little bit as well. And as Bill Landis noted, outside of the 2 scoring drives, Marshall averaged 2.2 yards per play. I was hoping to see more havoc plays in this game, though. I mean, considering the opponent, and, look, I've been harping on this for a couple of years now. The Silver Bullets did not force a turnover and only came up with 1 sack in this game. The Buckeyes received their lowest PFF grade for pass rush so far this season with a grade of 61.1 against Marshall. And your eyes would tell you that the defensive front was just not very disruptive in passing situations. I also thought Jim Knowles seemed a little slow to adjust to the quarterback run. It seemed like Stone Earl did have a fair amount of success repeatedly in the first half before any adjustments were made. At the same time, the Buckeyes did finish with 7 tackles for loss, and they did limit the Marshall running attack to 2.9 yards per carry. A.J. Turner, who was coming off back-to-back 100-yard rushing performances, was held to 32 yards and 7 carries. So you got to credit the defense for a good job in those areas. I thought Lathan Ransom was excellent again yesterday. He finished as Ohio State's leading tackler with 8. He had a tackle for loss. He also did actually force a fumble. He punched the ball out of Stone Earl's possession on Marshall's first scoring drive, and it was nearly recovered by the Buckeyes before it squirted out of bounds. Ransom finished as Ohio State's second highest graded defender according to PFF with a grade of 77.3. He was excellent against the run with a grade of 90.1. That was far and away the highest grade for any Buckeye in that category. Caleb Downs, I thought, was also really good yesterday. Downs finished as Ohio State's highest graded defender with an overall grade of 79.3. He was also their highest graded player for pass coverage with a grade of 81.3. I think right now, Ransom and Downs might be the best all-around players on the Ohio State defense. And I even joked with Paige yesterday that they might even be our best linebackers because I really trust them more at the second level as tacklers than I do any of our linebackers right now. So the Buckeyes make it through a lackluster non-conference schedule that offered very few tests without any major injuries, as far as we know. But overall, they did what they were supposed to do against opponents like Akron, Western Michigan, and Marshall. Ohio State heads into Big Ten play as one of only 2 teams in the country ranked in the top 5 nationally in total offense and total defense. Tennessee is the other. The Buckeyes currently sit number 5 nationally in total offense, and they're number 2 in total defense. They will leave the friendly confines of the Horseshoe for the first time this season next Saturday for their Big Ten opener against Michigan State in East Lansing. The Spartans look much improved under first-year head coach Jonathan Smith, who came over from Oregon State, where he had a lot of success. But Sparty was a 23-19 loser at Boston College last night. It was a rough night for Sparty quarterback Aiden Childs, who threw 3 picks in that game. Now, Paige, Chad, and I will have a complete preview of Michigan State for you this coming Thursday evening, so I'm not going to go too much more into Sparty right now. Before I let you go, I want to share a few thoughts on Michigan's surprising 27-24 win over USC in the Big House yesterday afternoon. Michigan manages to win that game despite only 32 yards passing from Alex Orji. Orji only attempted 12 passes in this game, completing 7 of them. Michigan ran it for 290 yards on 46 carries. Khalil Mullings was awesome in this game. He finished with 159 yards on 17 carries, and that included a 63-yarder on the game-winning touchdown drive. Mullings broke several tackles on that play to spring loose for that long run. It was the worst possible moment for the poor tackling that has dogged the Trojans during the Lincoln Riley regime to rear its ugly head. Mullings would eventually punch it in on 4th and goal from the 1-yard line with 37 seconds to play. Michigan won this game in much the same way it beat Penn State last season by almost completely disregarding the forward pass and running the ball down the Trojans' throats over and over again. The Michigan offense had 58 plays yesterday and ran the ball on 46 of them. And for the Trojans, look, they trailed 14-3 at the half. And then Miller Moss threw a terrible pick 6 to Will Johnson that put Michigan up 20-10 in the third quarter. But despite all of that, this game was there for the taking for the Trojans, and it looked like at one point they were going to win this damn game. The USC defense forced a Donovan Edwards fumble midway through the fourth quarter to set up the go-ahead touchdown. The USC defense would force a 3-and-out on Michigan's next possession. The Trojans would take over at their own 38-yard line with 5 minutes to play. You get a couple of first downs there, Lincoln Riley. This game is over. And I know that's easier said than done against that, salty Michigan defense, but instead, USC goes backward 3 plays, -3 yards. They only burn 59 seconds off the clock. For some unknown reason, Lincoln Riley calls 2 pass plays on that drive instead of keeping the ball on the ground and running clock. Both passes were incomplete. That helped preserve plenty of time for Michigan's game-winning scoring drive. Man, this was a huge missed opportunity for USC. I was wrong about them. I thought they would win this game comfortably. I thought they'd win by 2 scores. But for much of this game, to me, they just did not look ready for prime time. They looked a little overwhelmed by the environment. I thought they got manhandled for much of the game by Michigan in the trenches. And this outcome does not change my view of Michigan. I mean, there are still major concerns at quarterback. And outside of Colston Loveland, who's injured, for how long we don't know, that he'll be out, we don't know. They have no other threats at receiver. The way they managed to beat USC yesterday is not a sustainable approach for the rest of their schedule. It's not a winning formula. Man, I just thought USC really shit the bed in this game. And if I were a Trojan fan, I would just be very disappointed by the late game coaching and execution failures that led to this outcome. USC let a golden opportunity slip through their fingers, and this loss could really come back to haunt them on Selection Sunday. Okay, that's going to do it for me. Check your feeds on Thursday evening for a preview of Ohio State's next game against Michigan State from Paige, Chad, and myself. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and go Bucks. You've been listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. Follow us on X at South_Stands.